All right, so welcome to FTFs. This is session 4, I believe, of the consensus track. So we have today Alejandro from SE, who's going to present his latest work on SNARE. I'll let Alex do all the explaining of the historical background behind this and everything.
Yes, we'll get on that. We'll get on that in a bit. Actually, let me start with a real world historical event. So this is the siege of Constantinople, made by the Ottomans in 1453, if I remember properly. And what we have here is three Ottoman generals surrounding the city and with their blue army. And then we have one Byzantine general and an ally of the Byzantines. So we have in total 2 Byzantine generals, you could say. So here's the Italian, the Genovese province of Galatia that, they're allies with the Byzantines and, they're protecting this side from boats coming in with the chain in the golden horn. And so, what we know from consensus is if in partial synchrony, if we have 2 Byzantines out of 5, it is impossible to solve consensus, right? And that would mean that Constantinople could not have been conquered. But we know that Constantinople was conquered, right? More than Istanbul. So how did that happen? Well, what happened is that the Ottomans realized the Italians are not really Byzantines. They are merchants. They are rational people, financial people. And so they just approached them and said, look, we're going to go behind your city and into this part of the land, which is pretty crazy, actually. They went with the boat on land into this side because the walls were weaker here. And, if you talk to the Byzantines about this, we're going to crush your province. But if you stay shut, we'll conquer Constantinople and let you be. And so the Italians, which were not Byzantines, faced a very easy choice. And that's how the Ottomans conquer Constantinople. And so the question is, can we do the same thing in consensus? Can we exploit heterogeneity of faults? So not all the faults being the worst type of fault possible, not all of them being Byzantines, but perhaps some of them being rational or being faults that are only interested in causing safety attacks or liveness attacks, etc. And that's the nature of this line of work that I've been working on for years. And I'm going to start going through some of the background on this work, so previous work, before I get into the latest result that applies to the new trend of consensus protocols in the 5F+1 model, which I think is very relevant for Ethereum and a bunch of other, existing ones that are going in this direction. All the previous work applies to the typical 3F+1 model, right, of consensus protocols. First, I'm going to get into the rational case. Then I consider not rationality, not game theory, but just different types of faults. So faults that only break safety, faults that only break liveness in the presence of Byzantines. And then I even get into coalitions of Byzantines plus these other faults, such that they are so great that they may actually cause disagreements temporarily. But what can we do even in those cases in a programmatic way, in a protocol way? So let's get into that. So first, explain the model a bit and the rational agreement problem that we formulated. So the model is the typical consensus problem, termination, agreement, and validity, and we do not assume, this is applicable to the entire presentation, we do not assume any synchrony per se. We assume partial synchrony. And we're going to start with the rational model. So we have T Byzantines, which we can consider participants in a game with utilities that we just don't know. They could have out-of-protocol incentives, and they can behave in arbitrary ways. Then we have K rational players. And of course, when you consider rational players, you have to define the utility function. We make a sensible decision for blockchains that the utility function of rational players is to ensure consensus, unless they can cause a disagreement such that they can double spend, for example. So the reason is immediate. If they can double spend, they can, gain more. If they know they control the network and they can double spend, then they can basically increase their utility function by spending their money twice. And the utility function of that, in the case of, if you have consensus over a block, and this block, suppose for simplicity, the UTXO model. So this block is a number of transactions, an amount of transactions that are spending some inputs into some outputs. If you just add up all of the outputs, in the worst case, the double spending of all of the outputs, it would be the utility function of that disagreement, right? And the rest of the participants are correct players. And having defined the model, then we can define the problem. So the problem that we're trying to solve is basically to solve consensus for the typical DFT case. So less than a third of Byzantines and no rationals. And for some coalition, as long as we solve in partial synchrony the BFT case, and also some coalition of rationals that prefer to disagree, plus Byzantines that exceeds the 1/3 bound, that will be solving rational agreement for the first time, right, under this model. And so that's the problem that we set to solve. For that, it is useful to, this is built on a line of work from Joe Halper and Itai Abraham and other colleagues. That is very interesting, where they define the notion of KT punishment strategy. A KT punishment strategy is basically, so what K are rationals, we call anti-Byzantines. So a KT punishment strategy is a strategy that correct players can play if a coalition deviates from the protocol such that just the existence of this strategy is a deterrence from deviating. So an example is crime sentences, right, in the real world. So in the real world, some people might be incentivized to rob a bank because they don't have money, and if they rob the bank and they succeed, they can get a lot of money, but there's a probability of getting caught. And so they do a rational analysis and they say, okay, the probability of getting caught is quite high, multiplied by the crime sentence, it actually does not pay off for me to rob the bank in the first place, even though if I succeed, my utility function is great, right? And so this is an example of a punishment strategy. This is previous work. We haven't come up with the definition of a punishment strategy and their usefulness in these distributed game theoretical models. However, in this problem, in the rational agreement problem, punishment strategy is not enough. And the reason why it's not enough is because they control the network and they're more than a third. So they basically know that the probability of getting caught is 0. And so in cases like that also exist in the real world, you will have situations where, for example, a criminal group is so powerful that they have ties with the state. And they know that the probability of getting caught or deviating from robbing a bank is very, very low. So in that case, it pays off for them to basically rob a bank. But what law enforcement does in those cases, when they're after these big criminal groups, is they take some small fish in the group, they can sentence him for something else, but then they say, look, if you collaborate with us such that we can get the rest of the group, we set you free, right? We give you a reduced sentence. And so this is the same thing that we're going to do here. We call it a KTM baiting strategy. It's basically a type of punishment strategy that is only effective if M members of the coalition, if M members of KT actually betray the coalition. And this is exactly the trick that we're going to use in order to solve rational agreement. We actually proved that it is impossible to solve rational agreement otherwise. So you actually need some form of KTM baiting strategy. Just finally, to finish with the model, just to say that in order to implement a KTM baiting strategy, we make consensus protocols accountable. So consensus protocols are not inherently accountable, but there are existing works that show how to make any consensus protocol accountable. And then there are also, typically any consensus protocol in production in L1s are by default what they call safety accountable. And so accountability just says that if there is a disagreement, we will be able to cut the people responsible for the disagreement. Here's an example with, suppose we have a committee with three participants, right? Alice, Bob, and the devil. And what happens is the devil manages to cause a disagreement with participating with Alice into deciding this block in this block height, and then participating with Bob into deciding a different block for the same block height. So what will happen eventually is that Alice will broadcast the certificate of this decision, Bob will broadcast the certificate of their decision, and eventually they can cross-check certificates and detect the devil, right? The accountability is one step further into making this punishment strategy, these baiting strategies, but it's not enough because recall that the adversary controls the network, right? We're not assuming any form of synchrony, and so this means that we know we're going to caught the devil, but by the time we catch him, he might have spent all these funds already on chain, and so there's no disincentive for the attackers from causing the attack. So having explained the model, now we get into the solution. So the protocol, we call it TRAP, which stands for Tackling Rational Agreement Through Persuasion. So it's basically, you take an accountable consensus protocol and you wrap it into two more components. One is the financial component, right? We require everyone at the start of the consensus to deposit some money per player, and we offer a reward in exchange for information of some possible coalition that might be trying to cause a disagreement. And then finally, normally the consensus component, the consensus protocol will give a decision, right? Will terminate and give some decision. So in this case, what we're going to give is pre-decisions. And the pre-decisions are going to be the input of one last component that we call it the baiting component, whose purpose is to either confirm that there was no disagreement on pre-decisions, or if there was, to create a safe space for betrayers of the coalition to expose the coalition in a way that they know they cannot be front-run and stolen the reward. Because recall that the coalition is the one controlling the network. So if they see a member of the coalition betraying the coalition, they can basically outpace that message and steal the reward, which would be a punishment strategy against exposing the coalition, which is the opposite of what we want. But let me show it quickly. So here's an example of, this is how the baiting component works. So basically what you execute is at the end of the consensus protocol generates pre-decisions, and then we run this protocol that we call Byzantine fault-tolerant commit reveal. It's basically 2 reliable broadcasts and 1 final broadcast. The first reliable broadcast is just people encrypting some commitment to what they say they saw in the consensus step. So, for example, if you think that there was no disagreement whatsoever and you just pre-decided something, then you just commit to the encrypted version of that pre-decision. If you instead know that there was a disagreement and you have a proof for that, and you want to take the bait, you want to take the reward for exposing that coalition, then you can encrypt a list of the proofs of fraud. Then finally, the second reliable broadcast is just everyone sharing the first 2/3 RB delivered commitments from the first reliable broadcast. And then after that happens, everybody will share their decryption key to reveal the commitment. And why does this work? Well, let's show you with this example. So what we have here is 7 participants, 2 Alices, 2 Bobs, 2 Devils, so 2 Byzantines, and 1 rational, right? And so if the rational colludes with the Byzantines, they can cause a disagreement into deciding 1 value for Bobs and 1 other value for Alices. And I suppose the Byzantines say, look, if you collaborate with us, we give you 1 Bitcoin to the rational. So now the rational is incentivized to collude with the Byzantines. What Trap does, it says, this is an exaggerated example, by the way. The deposits are not that big, but we're going to show it later. What Trap does is say, oh, okay, well, let's take a deposit from each player of 1 Bitcoin, let's say, and we offer a reward of 2 Bitcoins to whoever exposes a coalition. And so now the rational player actually prefers to take 2 Bitcoins from betraying the Byzantines than what he could get from collaborating with them. And the BFTCR phase, the baiting phase that comes after the consensus protocol, enables the rational to expose the Byzantines. So this is the example of how the rational will do that in the BFTCR phase. So consensus has finished. There is 2 pre-decisions. So there has been a disagreement on pre-decisions. So Bobs receive value B, Alice's receives value A. And so what the rational player will do is, first, he will wait until he receives the certificates of decision from Alice's and from Bobs in order to build the proofs of frauds. Then he shares the first reliable broadcast of encrypted commitments to this proof of frauds. He waits until he sees that Alice's and Bobs have seen this encrypted commitment that he knows he will get because the Byzantines are still trying to cause this disagreement. And then at that moment, he reveals, oh, actually, the thing that I committed to is this proof of frauds. And so you should slash these 2 Byzantines. And so this is how you manage to create a situation where basically all of the, if these 2 Byzantine participants were rational as well, what happens is that the important bit is that nobody in the coalition knows what the others will do by the time they have to take a decision. This is what this BFTCR phase creates. It creates this condition where it's almost a kind of a prisoner's dilemma, right? If I don't know what the others do, if they turned out to expose the coalition, then my best move is to expose the coalition. And if it turns out that they don't expose the coalition, then my best move is also to expose the coalition, because then I'm the only one who gets the reward. So I get all the reward versus a fraction of the double spending, because I have to share it with the coalition. And so doing that analysis, what we get is here at the bottom, probably more important. For example, if for a block where the double spending is 10,000 Bitcoins, let's say, it's still kind of like a high number, but it's because we're trying to tolerate the highest number of Byzantines. For every Byzantine that we can tolerate less colluding, because Byzantines basically don't need to get anything from the double spending. They can just give all the gain from double spending to the rationals to incentivize them to collude. But yeah, so for 10,000 Bitcoins, if every player deposits 300 Bitcoins, then we can offer a reward that's slightly greater than that, and we can disincentivize all cases for all coalitions up to half of the participants. So basically, we prove that PROP with this deposit and reward and slashing mechanism can tolerate up to, for example, a third of rationals and an extra sixth of Byzantines, or all rationals up to less than half, or the backwards compatible case of no rationals as just less than a third of Byzantines. So anything within here is kind of like the edges of the maximum tolerance that PROP provides. And so, these numbers are somewhat applicable and somewhat realistic, but the most important thing is that it is possible to solve rational agreement without any assumption on synchrony for safety in the presence of a coalition of rationals and Byzantines that prefer to cause a disagreement, thanks to PROP, and it's for the first time. Okay, so this was for single shot consensus, right? And so the first step that we got into is, okay, what happens in the repeated game? What happens in a blockchain, right? Where you don't decide on one block and then you're done. You keep deciding on new block heights. So it gets more complicated, of course, because now rational participants have to decide, okay, I could expose the coalition now. I could betray my coalition in one block height and get rewarded once for it, or I can continue with them. And we control the network. So we can continue double spending for as long as we want, or until we have spent, all our coins in both branches. So it is a bit harder to disincentivize that. So thinking about that, we looked into how can we make the future more uncertain, right? How can we make future instances of consensus in the repeated game discounted? And this is something that happens inherently, right? The time value of money decreases the future because it's more uncertain. But we wanted to model that in a way that is more, that gives us more realistic results. And so we came up with two ways. One is, which is applicable probably perhaps to some scenarios, is to resort to a random beacon that sorts a committee out of the entire pool of replicas. The reason is that there is a probability then that even if a coalition controls more than a third of the total number of replicas, if you sort a committee, depending on the size of the committee, there is a probability that is non-negligible that there is one committee where the coalition does not control more than a third in that committee. And when that happens, it is in that instance that the attack fails. So that gives us some probability to play with, and in order to get some results in the repeated game. The other way is to just assume probabilistic synchrony, right? We still assume partial synchrony in each of the instances, but across instances, so a message sent some instances in the past, there is some form of probability that is exponentially increasing that if the message was sent, then eventually it will arrive, right? And so that also gives us some discounted future, right? Because as soon as the participants send two conflicting messages, they have basically kind of like a clock that is probabilistic that increases over time. But having looked at these probabilities, we were looking at this in the game theoretical model in order to create a model where we can play in the repeated game for these K rationals with T Byzantines. But when looking into this, we realized, well, actually, this can work even for a coalition that has Byzantines and just faults that are like rationals in that they prefer to cause disagreement than to prevent liveness, but for which we don't know the utility function of disagreement. So we have to assume that they might want to try to commit the disagreement regardless of the deposit and the reward and how much they could get slashed. And that's what we did with this second line of work that we call Basilic and ZLB that has important implications for SNARE, for the latest result. So the first result was Basilic. And in here, what we do is we basically present what we call the Byzantine-deceitful-benign model. That is the first time that there is a model that clearly distinguishes between faults that try to cause a safety attack and faults that try to cause a liveness attack in a disjoint way. So there are, yeah, sorry?
Can we do a pause for a few stupid questions?
Go
Just
for
to
it.
make sure we're all on the same page. Can you go back to maybe I think the diagram when you had the time-based like diagram with all the players and sending the messages? I think that was useful.
Mm-hmm. So here.
Yeah, for example, here. So okay, so just to start with, so the model to think about for the rational actors, as you're saying, they're basically they're just trying to double sign, right? Like they will double sign if there's money to be stolen from a
Exactly.
from that. Okay, I see.
And the incentives for that is exactly how much they can double spend, which you can estimate as a rational. You can just look at what you're deciding on and say, well, in the worst case, all of the transactions come from money from the rationals that are trying to double spend. So in the worst case, they're double spending everything that we're deciding on.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
And then going to this diagram, so I guess the part I'm not understanding is what is this proof of fraud, and why is it only the rational actors that didn't create this? Like, why can't if there's a double spending, right, in any network?
Yeah.
Like you can see that, right, by accountability.
Exactly.
You were saying.
So this is what I said here. So, or like better here. So yeah, eventually the deviants will get caught through accountability.
Okay.
But we don't know when, because it's part of synchrony. So by the time that happens, they might have double spent, and breached their funds out of the chain. So it's too late.
I see.
It doesn't disincentivize anything because they control the network.
Gotcha. Okay, I think this ties things. So then you're saying you add this wrapper protocol with like the deposit funds and a commit reveal, just so that you catch it like synchronously, basically, is what you're saying.
Not catch it synchronously, but to basically block termination, because the thing is, this rational, if you're trying to cause a disagreement, termination requires the message from this rational on both partitions. So he can just say, I know there's a disagreement, and I'm just not going to send my encrypted commitment until I get the proof of fraud.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay, so you know how like Vitalik always goes around, he's like, oh, like double spending is just not really a real thing, because we have this network of everyone's running a full node in our assumption, and therefore like anyone trying to double spend will just be caught, and no one will follow that forward. I guess here you're assuming that that's not the case or something like that. Or...
I will turn it on its head. I will say more that this is the analysis that tells you exactly when, for some model, it tells you exactly when it actually pays off for them to do it, with pure in-protocol incentives. Because you could, it doesn't work. Like, we're in the charters world, right? I don't think it is reasonable to say, oh, double spending is not happening because law enforcement chases them. All right, fine, but that happens with Binance as well. We don't need blockchains for this. So this is the in-protocol incentives form of analyzing what is the required deposit to secure an amount of funds.
Nice. Okay, that works for me.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, did you have a question?
Oh yeah. I guess very sort of stupid question is that all of these rounds do take place before finality, right? So you need to go through one round of each of these to guarantee finality. Is that
this is very interesting. So it depends to you. I'm gonna go back to that at the end for the result that makes that is much more applicable to what the current trend. But it depends on, like, finality is kind of like subjective always, right? It depends on the user itself, and it's gonna be more relevant data. But basically, if you're a client, then you can decide, okay, the pre-decision gives me 33% economic security, right? Unless the coalition is greater than 33%, this pre-decision is safe. And if that's not enough for you, you're welcome to wait a couple more reliable broadcast rounds and increase that security by another 15%. 17%, sorry, with some rational analysis.
Oh yeah, that's assuming like it's very dynamic, right? Because like in the earlier slide, you'd said that given like the Byzantine, in this slide, oh no, I think the one before that.
Here?
No, like in the one with the exchange, this one, the accountability.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you said that it might just be too late when like Alice and Bob get to know that like the devil is like the Byzantine actor, and then that the devil might have just gained control over the network by that time. But if there was sort of finality gadget there, you by definition couldn't gain control over it, right? Because I don't know.
Yeah. So okay, these are good points. So it depends on who you're talking about finality. If you're talking about as an off-chain user looking at the protocol, you're talking about the protocol itself. But as an off-chain user looking at the protocol, I can, the protocol, for example, could have, it depends how you design the protocol as well, right? You could have a protocol that, and this is why we get into this zero loss blockchain paper that I'm going to explain shortly later. But yeah, so imagine for now, let's imagine that the protocol is just not resolving any disagreement. And so behavior is undefined. If a disagreement occurs, then we have to resolve the social consensus, but it still provides concurrently to the chain continuing in the normal way, right? As soon as there is a pre-decision for the protocol itself is a decision, but it's still all the participants provide this concurrent path with the reliable broadcast. So you as a client can say, look, I don't really trust this decision. It's too cost sensitive for me. So I'm just going to wait for this to reliable broadcast just to confirm that the economic security is greater, for example. And so that will give you, as a client, an option for greater economic security that doesn't translate into a protocol. The protocol will still turn into undefined behavior, and you need to resolve the social consensus to solve the disagreement. But the point is, me as a client, I'm not giving my off-chain product. I'm not giving, you buy a boat of me, and I see it as paid, but I don't trust you, so I'm going to wait a bit longer to get more economic security for giving you the boat. And if that doesn't happen, then I don't give you the boat. So I don't actually suffer from the disagreement.
Okay, so it's not deterministic finality, is it? Like it's I don't know, it's like a very crude example, but like in, I guess, Bitcoin, you have to wait 6 blocks, or it's like 6 confirmations. So, like you get like decently good chance of it being actually finalized. You have some math that goes on here as well, right? Yeah.
No, you get still deterministic finality, but deterministic depends on what the adversary that you are happy to tolerate. So if you are happy with an adversary that controls up to a third of participants, then that's your deterministic finality. The point where I can confirm less than a third could not have done anything given what I have seen. But if that is not enough for you, then what Trapp tells you is there is a way to get even greater deterministic finality against a greater adversary if you wait for 2 more reliable broadcasts.
Okay. But isn't the max, like the upper bound on that, defined by the number of Byzantine parties that can be there? So like for 5F plus 1 shouldn't cross more than 20%, right?
For 5F plus 1, yes. This is for the 3F plus 1 model.
3F.
Yeah, but later I'm going to get into the 5F plus 1. Yeah. Okay, great questions. Okay, so now it's still in the 3F plus 1 model, but now we instead of considering it, like now we basically assume that we don't know the utility functions of the rational, so they're not rational anymore, or you could get them, we call them deceitful, right, or safety breaking faults. So faults are always going to try to break safety, but otherwise they're going to reply. I forgot to say, perhaps on the rational case, the reason why we assume that from strictly in protocol incentives doesn't make sense for them to prevent liveness is that they have stake slash. So if they prevent liveness forever, the stake is just going to be lost, right? So it's the same argument here. We don't know how incentivized they are to cause an equivocation attack, a double spending or triple spending, whatever it is. But we know that eventually they want some form of termination, because otherwise they're going to be stuck forever. And so yeah, there are existing models in the state of the art that consider a heterogeneity of faults. So the most popular one now, perhaps with Solana, that's been revived, is a mix of crash faults and Byzantine faults. There's also the BAR model, Byzantine altruistic rational model. The reason why this model is different is that they don't consider coalitions between rationals and Byzantines. They consider basically selfish rationals that don't collude together. So it's extremely easier to solve the problem there, although it's very relevant for different rational models that they use. Then I've been talking about KT robustness up until now, right? The notion of coalitions. Then probably the closest to the model that we're going to present here is the Allied back corrupt, which is also kind of popular. I don't know if you're familiar with it. But Allied back corrupt, it was presented by Dalia Malki in this paper called Dalia Malki and colleagues. Sorry, I don't remember all the authors. And they call it basically Allied back corrupt. It's basically faults that would cause a disagreement if they know they can succeed, but otherwise they behave correctly. We don't make that otherwise distinction in this model, in the Byzantine-deceitful-benign models. So deceitful faults are faults that always try to cause a disagreement, even if they're not enough to cause a disagreement. They still try, or we let them to try. Even if it could be that trying to get a disagreement and failing actually prevents termination. But we work around that. And so I'm gonna skip through this a little bit, just because I want to make sure there is enough time for the latest results. But just to say that here on the left plot, what we see is in green will be the area that typical BFT protocols tolerate, so Byzantine fault tolerance. And what we managed to do with the BDB model is to increase tolerance to all the orange area. And this is basically through a family of protocols that allow you to tweak the quorum threshold that is shown here on the right. So depending on the quorum threshold, the voting threshold, the quorum size, whatever you want to call it, typically it will be 2/3, right, for the 3f+1 model, and then you tolerate a maximum number of faults, Byzantine faults. Or in the case of the BDB model, anything in between, and actually it'd be easier to show it here. And this would be in the case of the purple line. So the purple line says here at the bottom left, 0, 0, and then t n/3. What does that mean? So that means that this is the typical case, right? You tolerate 1/3 of Byzantine faults and no extra fault. But the beauty of the Basilic class of protocols is that if there are less Byzantine faults, suppose there are 1/6, you actually tolerate an extra 1/6 of faults that try to break safety and an extra 1/6 of faults that try to break liveness. Only liveness and only safety, right? For a total on less than half. And also the beauty of this protocol is that you don't need to commit to any combination of these three. Whatever, so this entire line is tolerated by the same protocol without any changes. Each of the lines is one instance of the protocol. Okay, so yeah, I'm gonna go forward because I don't want to get too lost into this result. But so yeah, to get a little bit more into, sorry.
We can, if you have a bit of time, we can go a bit like, over if it makes sense, if to present these results in order to, like I just saying we shouldn't to the latest result, like we can stay on another 10-15 minutes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, fair enough. Well, the idea of this protocol is not that complicated. It doesn't matter for which protocol you do it. The point is that the idea is very simple. If you don't manage to move to like cause termination, then participants terminate. Well, sorry. If you're stuck in a round, so if there is a round where you cannot gather, if there is a view where you cannot gather, if there's like a number of views where you cannot gather enough votes to ensure termination, what participants do is they start exchanging the messages they have received in order to get accountability on the fly, accountability before termination occurs. And they also, as they start detecting proof of frauds from participants, so participants that have double sign, they dynamically and locally start removing them. They don't even need to agree with others on who to remove. As soon as I detect them, I remove them while we're running consensus. And this is something that is safe to do as long as you keep updating the committee size and the threshold size. And that is the trick that allows us to basically eliminate faults that might be trying to cause a safety attack, but resulting in a liveness problem. And so through that trick, we managed to increase tolerance to any combination of the three types of faults that are shown in different lines. Then perhaps something interesting to mention for Basilic as well is here's on the right is a comparison with state-of-the-art consensus protocols. Oh, another thing to mention is it doesn't require any other modification. So the communication complexity is the same. In the good case, the latency will be the same. You won't even, in the good case, you won't even exchange any message, any extra message. It's only in these bad cases that we exchange just a number of messages that do not increase the communication complexity and manage to get a lot more tolerance. And the example is shown here on the right plot. So in the triangle will be the typical BFT protocols. So they tolerate 1/3 of Byzantine faults and nothing extra. Then the existing work from Dalia Markey and other colleagues, flexible BFT, that tolerates this dash purple line. But the difference with the result is that then each client needs to commit to a number of faults. So if they tolerate 2/3 of a live back corrupt replicas, they don't tolerate any Byzantine replica. If they tolerate 1/3 of Byzantines, they don't tolerate any extra replica. Whereas in our case, depending on the instantiation of Basilic, the typical one being 2/3, so in orange, we tolerate the entire line. right? We don't need clients to commit to any combination of faults. They just commit to one instance of Basilic, and they tolerate any of the combination of faults in that line. So it's basically more tolerance for free, so to speak. So that has been Basilic, right? We tolerate up to 2/3 of total faults. But still, if you have a third of Byzantines, you only tolerate the Byzantines, right? Less than a third of Byzantines. So this is the bottom left on the left plot, right? If there's 0 deceitful and 0 benign, then you tolerate a third of Byzantines, but nothing extra. We get some extra for free if Byzantines are less, and without having to know how many Byzantines there are. But you don't get anything extra if there are a third of Byzantines, right? So can we do something in that case? And that is the next result that we do. We cannot solve consensus, obviously. This is what Ameya was saying. It's impossible, right? In partial synchrony, there's more than a third of Byzantines, or more than a third of safety breaking faults, then a disagreement will occur. If none of them are rational, if they're just going to continue with it and there's no way to disincentivize it. But what we can do is eventually detect them, slash them, resolve the fork in some kind of programmatic way, and continue, right? And for this, we need to assume, again, some form of probabilistic synchrony, not just pure partial synchrony. So that's kind of the trick for the economic analysis of this. For the non-economic analysis, this can be done purely programmatically in partial synchrony. And that is ZLB that...
Can you redefine probabilistic synchrony? What is that model exactly?
Yeah, so probabilistic synchrony just says so partial synchrony says we don't know, there is some bound on communication delay, but we don't know it. And probabilistic synchrony says we actually know that all messages will follow some probability distribution of arrival. So as more time passes, the probability of having there been a message and me not having heard about it decreases exponentially.
I see.
Yeah.
So you have like a CDF, and then as you wait, you're just kind of getting closer to.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And so, yeah, based on that model, we present the ZLB, zero loss blockchain, that was presented at the SM24 and actually won best paper. And so, yeah, we managed to tolerate up to 2/3 of total safety breaking faults, of which a third might be Byzantine. And of course, we do it for blockchains. We don't do it for single shot consensus. The trick is to allow temporary disagreements. And this is basically the gist of how it works. So we extend, so blockchains will just have typically a consensus instance, and then followed by another consensus instance, followed by another consensus instance, and so on and so forth, right? What we do here is we still have the same. We have consensus, and then when it terminates, we start a new consensus protocol. But concurrently with a new consensus instance starting, we run 4 extra. We keep listening for messages in case we detect something, in case we get more good messages, or in case we detect fraud, right? In case we detect a disagreement. So if we get lucky and we get, imagine everyone is alive, right? If everyone is alive, we know for a fact eventually, and we will get the maximum possible economic security that there could be, which for the 3+1 model would be 66%, or we will detect a disagreement. And so this will be the first event that could occur, which we call it alpha confirmation. So we move forward with 2+1 messages, but we keep listening to new messages. And if we listen to new messages, we update the economic security of that instance. This is what we call alpha confirmation outside of the economics model, right? In just the purely BFT models, which means basically if a value is alpha confirmed, it just says that only a coalition controlling more than alpha of the processes can cause a disagreement. So if you only receive 2+1 votes, then it could be a coalition controlling more than a third. But if you receive all the votes and they all vote for the same value, then the coalition will have to control more than 2/3. So that's an usable, economic security measure. And then the bad thing will happen, right? It could be that you wait for more messages and you actually detect a disagreement. And in that case, we start some consensus round to exclude these participants, to include new participants in order to restore the total committee size. And then we run some protocol to reconcile this fork that has occurred. And the reconciliation basically says, we're not gonna roll anything back, and we're just gonna fund the transactions that double spend with the / stake from the participants that we detected as fraudsters. So there's no rolling back, even if there was a disagreement. Now, of course, you might be asking, what about the account model? Yeah, in this case, it was for the UTXO model. You could imagine something in the account model where, for general state, where each transaction is attached to some amount of insurance, that says basically, if there was a disagreement, this is the amount that you will need to pay me for the disagreement of this transaction. But yeah, it does get more convoluted in that, right? Recall this is researchy. So yeah, in that, basically, you have situations where, suppose you have less than 2/3 but more than 5/9 safety breaking faults. And so what they can cause in the worst case scenario, if it's just less than 2/3, they can cause a disagreement in just one consensus instance. They can cause a disagreement into n/3 branches. So instead of a double spending or a triple spending, it will be an n/3 tuple spending, right? In just one instance. So they have one Bitcoin, they can spend it, and there's 100 members of the committee, they can spend it actually 33 times. They can actually spend one Bitcoin as if it was 33 Bitcoins. But eventually they get caught. We run this exclusion protocol, and after that, we prove that it's only possible to continue with a double spending. The coalition is so big that they could still, even after having detected enough of them, they can still continue, but only with 2 branches. If instead there is less than 5/9, then suppose they could be causing a triple spending, but then after detecting the disagreement, only 1 branch can continue. So the disagreement is completely solved with one caveat. The caveat is there could still be correct replicas that have not even detected that there was a disagreement in the first place yet, right? They eventually will receive that message, but they could still be with the outdated committee. And then finally, if there's less than a half of safety breaking faults, then the moment that we detect them and the exclusion consensus finishes, excluding the replicas that have been detected as fraudsters, only 1 branch can continue. So consensus is completely restored from that moment on. Now, this is a long table, but the important bit that I want to say is that bit where I was saying that there could still be honest replicas that have not detected that there was a disagreement in the first place. So even though we detected it and we resolved it, we don't know if the third person has yet detected it. And so it could still be that we still continue for some instances with some correct clients believing something happened when it was in fact double spending or triple spending. The notion that we know that this cannot happen anymore. So the moment where we know that we switch back from eventual consensus to normal consensus is what we call awareness. And the interesting bit here from this table is just that if you want to tolerate more faults for eventual consensus, so you're going to tolerate more faults such that you can resolve potential disagreements programmatically, then the notion of knowing when consensus is restored disappears. You don't know. You know it will eventually happen, that you are back into normal consensus, but you don't know when. It could be that you have already reached that moment, but you will never know about it. And yet, if you decrease the total number of faults that you tolerate for eventual consensus, the total number of faults that you can tolerate trying to cause a temporary disagreement, then awareness actually becomes tractable. So particularly when you assume that the maximum tolerable number of faults is less than half of the total committee size, then you get immediate awareness. So basically, this is the easiest road to understand. So what this means is that if the adversary controls less than half in the worst case, we may be in a situation where we don't have consensus, but we know we're going to detect it, we're going to resolve it, and we know exactly the moment that we are going to resolve it in a way that no correct client can continue believing something that is not true anymore. Okay. So let's get into the latest thing. So we have covered the 3+1 model. So with this background of works in this direction, we got into the new trend, the 5+1 model. What about it? And so the first thing was to look into the rational model, right? Follow the same path, the rational model. And then we realized there's something interesting. And it's basically this asymmetry in how participants will cause a disagreement in this model.
Al,
yes.
Can we go back to the summary slide?
Of course. Sorry, I should have asked that. Yeah. You mean here?
Yeah. Okay. Can you recap the kind of whole thing, given everything we've been talking about? Like, can I
Yes.
think of Basilic as some kind of, not finality, but kind of, some kind of gadget that finds who the coalition parties were or something? Is that how you think about it, or am I completely off here?
Not Basilic, but ZLB, yes. ZLB would be like that. So the first result trap basically says, okay, let's look at the game theoretical model. Let's assume the rationality of some participants and what can we do with it? And we find a way to tolerate more than a third of faults with some rationals in this coalition such that consensus is still preserved. So there's no disagreement ever. But that requires some assumption on the utility function of rationals. We make sensible assumptions that are measurable, right? The number of outputs in a block, but it requires that analysis. And we might get it wrong, right? And so the attack might still happen. So the second step, yeah?
Sorry, when you say no disagreements, you mean between all of the honest parties that are part of consensus, or you mean that for the clients? Like, what are you talking about?
Or I guess no, in general, there will just not be, so the disagreement will cause a disagreement in pre-decisions, but because the consensus protocol does not yield termination in trap, but is rather the input to this last extra phase, then there will be no disagreement. This is for the single shot consensus, right? We're just talking in an abstract sense on the consensus problem. But then, that question is more answered in the latest result. It'll be on how we resolve forks in a case of a blockchain, etc. But before ZLB, then in Basilic, we started looking at what if rationals, we just don't know the utility function, but we know that they don't want to prevent liveness. And we managed to also still guarantee full consensus. But the trick is that we need to decrease the number of Byzantines, and then we can increase. So for every Byzantine that you lose, you can get one extra safety breaking fault and one extra liveness breaking fault. But we're still, if there's less than a third of Byzantines, then there's 0 extra, right? And so we take it one step further by allowing temporary disagreements that we resolve on the fly, slashing participants and whatnot in ZLB. So and that way we actually get up to 2/3 of total safety breaking faults.
Gotcha, I see. So they're more like, okay, can you go back to the I think it's your zero blockchain diagram, or zero loss blockchain, I forget how you call it.
Here.
Yeah. So yeah, maybe this is why I misunderstood the Basilic. But so you have these optional kind of 4 things. Why are those optional? Or are those kind of running in parallel always?
Yeah, optional might have been not the right word actually to put here. It's not that it's optional, it's just that so if you have a third of crash faults, none of these will yield anything. So you're just waiting for messages, but they're not gonna arrive. So they're just running on a best effort basis. If there is a disagreement, you're guaranteed to run 3, 4, and 5. If all of them are alive and there is no disagreement, you're guaranteed to terminate 2. But otherwise, they might just be running forever, right?
Gotcha. Okay. So the reason why I was asking if Basilic is you can see as some kind of gadget is because of this. Here you say like membership change instance of Basilic. So
right.
Is the right model more to think that this new ZLB is kind of using Basilic as a building block or something?
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. So this ZLB is using Basilic to actually get the maximum number of fault tolerance when you detect some disagreement.
Gotcha. Okay.
Because we run it in the exclusion and inclusion consensus phases.
Okay. That helps. I'll definitely need to go back to this, but this helps. Thanks.
Yeah, it might have been a little bit like a lot of results. But now let's focus on the thing that is more probably fresh in your heads with the 5F+1 model, and over here hopefully is a bit more tractable and easier to follow. So in general, when you look at the 5F+1 model, right, tolerance is 20% for safety or lightness, right, for Byzantines. But then when we started looking into the adaptation of trap to this model, so the game theoretical model, then I realized there's actually that kind of this kind of like common knowledge, but I didn't realize of the implications that this might have had for an analysis like the one we do in trap. And it's the fact that there's 2 different types of safety breaking attacks that you can cause. One is basically an equivocation within a view, and the other one is an equivocation across views. So let's show that with this example. We have 6 participants, Alice, Bob, and 2 devils. And if what we know from the 5+1 model, imagine minimint, simplex, your protocol of choice, is that if Bob sees 5 votes for a value, let's say orange, then it terminates. And if that happens, then Alice is guaranteed to notarize that value, right? In the worst case scenario, Alice will get something like this. For as long as the Byzantines are just F, in the 5+1 model, Alice is guaranteed to see at least 3 votes for orange and 2 for blue, right? So it's guaranteed to notarize orange, and so in the next view, Alice can finalize, can terminate with orange, perhaps, or in some views in the future. And the reason why Alice needs to take a decision after receiving 5 votes is that one of the participants might have crashed, so you cannot just wait for months, right? In synchrony, we already know that. But what that means is that if you have a situation like this one with the 3 votes for blue and 3 votes for orange, you can have, of course, this is already common knowledge as well, you can have a situation where Bob notarizes blue and Alice notarizes orange, but then eventually agreement is resolved in some future view, and perhaps they decide orange, right? So what about this? Now imagine we have 2 Byzantines, right? More than F. And what can happen is that in across views is, so a way to break safety is for to get Bob to see 5 votes for blue, and then Alice actually, instead of getting a notarization for blue, it gets a notarization for orange. And so in the next view, Alice actually decides orange. Yeah, and that this is how a disagreement will occur. This is one way. The other way is, all right, one other result is that now imagine we have a lot more participants. So instead of having 6, we have 6 multiplied by 10, so 60 of them, right? So in that case, we can make it so that only one of the Bobs decides in this view. And in the next view, only one of the Bobs again for orange. And then in the next view, B+2, one of the Bobs decides for purple, and so on and so forth. So we can have actually a disagreement to many branches, not just a double spending. But this is for a disagreement across views, right? What about in the same view, right? In the same view V, how can the adversary cause a disagreement between Bob and Alice? So how can we have this situation where Bob has 5 votes for blue and Alice has 5 votes for orange? Well, it turns out that with just 20% of the Byzantines is not enough. Just with these 2, we cannot make the math to get 5 blocks for orange and 5 blocks for blue. We need 2 more. So actually the economic security increases to 60%, to 80, depending on how many messages you receive, right? If you only receive if you only receive 80% of the messages, then the economic security is 60%. But if you receive all the messages, then your economic security can increase to 80%. So there's this asymmetry where across views disagreement has an economic security of 20, but within the same view, the economic security is 60. So can we exploit that? Can we increase the economic? Can we find a way to increase the economic security of the other case, the 20% case, the across views disagreement, so that the economic security matches this within the same view?
Wait, so your blocks here are kind of the votes of the different parties on a single views block.
Yeah, here on the left it will be, yeah. So Alice votes for blue, Bob votes for orange, and then the doubles vote for both.
Yeah, that makes sense. I was just super confused. I thought it was a blockchain, so I was like, why is there blocks in the single view? Yeah, that makes sense.
I'm sorry. Yeah, maybe I should have mentioned it. But yeah, so if Bob sees, so if Bob sees 5 votes for blue, then he decides blue. Alice sees 5 votes for orange, decides orange, right? And so yeah, as I was saying, there's 2 attacks. I hope it was understood, the previous one. I understand it must have been very confusing with that understanding of these blocks. But yeah, so basically we have the across views attack that requires only 20% of the Byzantines, or the same view attack that requires 60% of the Byzantines, of the participants being Byzantine. So can we like bring up the security of the across view attack into the same view attack, which will actually increase the economic security of these protocols to 60% and not 20? And so that's what we set out to do with the follow-up of trap in the 5+1 model. We call it a SNARE. And we have 2 variants. The first one is basically, we don't even consider rationals at all. You can think of them, the easiest way to think of them is the alive back corrupt model. So again, as I explained before, this model that we didn't create that was presented in this other paper called flexible BST, where basically allied backward replicas are replicas that if they know they can cause a disagreement, they will, but otherwise they be head correct. So if they're not enough to basically cause a disagreement attack, they will just be head correct. And what we do is we basically run these consensus protocols, but we wrap them. Again, as in trap, the output of the consensus protocol is not a decision anymore, it's a pre-decision. And it becomes the input of just one more round of broadcast, not even reliable broadcast, just a simple broadcast where people say, I have decided or I have not decided, and this is the value that I have decided or no value if I haven't decided on anything. And by doing that, what you're basically doing is that this round is only run, it's not run per view, right? It's just at the end of terminating consensus. And it doesn't have views, it's just one broadcast. So in order to cause a disagreement, you can cause a disagreement across views, but then you need to run this one view instance where everyone is going to be waiting for n minus f broadcast for the same value. So just 20% of the nodes are not enough. Basically, we are converting the across view attack into a same view attack with just one extra round of broadcast. So it's a wrapper for any consensus protocol. And so this is an example that shows it. So again, we have these 6 processes. Again, 5 and 6 are the devil, right? They are the adversary. And suppose we have in the first view, the first process decides A. And then the rest of the processes, the rest of the correct processes decide B on the second or third view. And so typically you will already have reached a disagreement, right? These 2 processes will have caused a disagreement. But now because we introduce an extra round that we call here simple finalization round, after decision, well, in this case, pre-decision, after termination, then the disagreement cannot occur. Because now if I'm process 1, then I cannot get 5 messages in this round that say, yeah, we decided A. And the same for process 2. Well, actually, in this case, for process 2, they could get it. So these ones could decide B, but it's impossible for process A to say, I decide A. It will not receive 5 messages for A. So in this case, causing that situation for A requires 2 more votes for A. So it requires 2 more Byzantine participants. Is that clear?
Not really for me.
Yeah, let me try and use the painting tool. So okay, so here is what each of them have decided at the end of the consensus protocol, right? So they're pre-decisions.
So in these cases, like, wait, so these views, like, can I think of normal, like, minimit or hydrangea?
Yeah, yeah.
Right? Okay,
so
okay.
this is minimit. This is minimit.
Okay, I see. And so
a minimit will normally terminate here, right? Like this process will say, okay, I decided A according to minimit, so I'm done. But we say, no, that's not the end here. Now minimit gives pre-decisions to a new round. And this new round requires n minus f of the same value for termination to occur. And so if I'm A, if I'm process 1 and I pre-decided A, then I share A. But the only votes that are for A are 1, 2, and 3. So I will not, this disagreement will stop here. I will not decide A.
sorry, where
Because
are these coming from?
Sorry?
You said 1, 2, 3. Where are these votes coming from?
So these are the Byzantines, right? So they vote for both, either A and B, whichever worst case. So for A, A will receive the votes for A.
I see.
Whereas P2, P3, and P4 will receive B. So P2, P3, and P4, they actually managed to get 5 votes for B. So they terminate and they actually do decide B. But it is not possible to terminate deciding A. Whereas in minimum, it was. In minimum, this is already a decision for A. But in this case, because of this simple finalization round that happens once, there's no use for it. It is not possible to decide A.
Yeah, I kind of see, but I think I'm just missing too much knowledge here, even about like the 5+1 models to follow. But maybe some dumb questions, maybe that could help people. This view structure, right? So here you're not saying like these A's and B's, you're just saying we're advancing through the views, but we keep kind of getting these votes on the view ones blocks, which are A and B. That's what I'm seeing here with these view 1, 2, 3, or
yeah. So this will be like minimum. We're running the first view, and there's some let's say there's some actually this kind of like misleading. I should probably don't focus on P5 and P6, but basically in view 1, you could have a situation like the one I showed here, where where Bob sees 5 votes for orange, right? In this case, orange is A, and so it decides. It already decides A, and it stops participating. It just shares its certificate of decision and terminates. But because there's more than this situation actually, so Bob will decide blue is A, but because there's 2 Byzantines, it could be that Alice sees a notarization for another value that is not blue. This is a notarization for A. So in the new view, Alice goes voting for something else than what Bob decided. So in the new view, Alice can decide on this other value. And that's how a disagreement occurs. So that's what I'm showing here. So in the first view, Bob decides. In the first view, Bob decides A. But then in the future views, everyone decides B, let's say.
So when you say decide, you mean like, so there's two thresholds, right? The notarization and the commit. When you say like you need to, I mean, my simple model might be wrong. I forget what the numbers are. The numbers I feel keep changing, but you notarize at 40%, let's say mini-mit, and then you like commit at 80% or something, right? But here
the trick is that, the point is that your notarization is what you vote for in the next view. So how you preserve safety is that if someone decides, it is guaranteed that everyone else will have to notarize that value. But because the adversary controls more than 20%, the adversary can create a situation where someone decides a value, but the remainder of the honest processes notarize a different value.
I see.
So they go in the next view voting for this other value, so they cannot decide in this other view this other value.
Is that really?
That's why.
I see, right.
Exactly. This is why the Byzantine fault tolerance is 20%, like less than 20%. So as soon as you go beyond that, this is how disagreement occurs in mini-mint. Somebody decides blue, but because of this double voting by these 2 participants, let me go again in the this is not here. Because of this double voting, Alice sees this. So it notarized. And imagine not just Alice, everyone here claims to see this. So these 3 and these 2. So Bob in view B decides blue, but everyone else goes to the next view voting for orange. And so they decide orange. Think about mini-mint. If you get these messages, what do you notarize?
You're saying these 2 blues were like in the first view, but then everyone kind of times out and they go to the other one. Is that what you're saying? And then they flip to 5 oranges, or?
Sorry, say that again.
I guess I'm just not following why you're saying that here you decide with like 3 orange and 2 blues on Alice.
No, but Alice doesn't decide in this view. But this is what. So think about mini-mint. Imagine in mini-mint you even move with less votes, right? As long as the votes are for the same value.
Okay.
Imagine you receive this number of votes. This is 40% for orange. Alice jumps to the next view, voting for orange. And imagine everyone does that, except one participant, one honest player.
Yes.
And instead of receiving the 3 oranges, receive 5 blues. And so that participant decides blue. But everyone else goes to the next view, votes for orange, and decides orange.
Okay, I see.
So that's how the disagreement occurs. And but the beauty is that occurs. That safety attack only requires 20% of the participants being Byzantine or more. But the other attack requires a lot more. It requires 60%. Because in one view, since you're waiting for 80 votes, it's a lot harder to cause a disagreement in the same view, right? It's easier for future views because you only have 1 voting round. If you have 2 voting rounds, if you use a protocol where you wait for 80% of the votes and you have 2 voting rounds, then the economic security will be 60%. And that's exactly what we're trying to do without paying the cost of 2 voting rounds in every single view. So we're extracting the second voting round outside of the consensus protocol and just adding it at the end, outside of views, just one extra decision round, or in this case, we call it simple finalization, right?
Yeah, I think I see. I definitely need to go, I think, reread even Minimit, because the model I have in my brain has always been like, oh, Minimit is kind of an extension of simplex, and in simplex, you don't kind of go to another round to vote, right? It's kind of each view is just kind of has its own final, like you just wait for messages whenever they happen, but you're kind of always finalizing the same view. Whereas it seems here you're saying, oh, you go to the next view and then you send votes for the previous view. So I think I'm just confused myself.
Right. So even in simplex, it could be a situation where you receive 80% of the votes, and then you have 41% of the votes for a value and 39% for another value. And you must continue, you must start the next view voting for the value that has 41% support. Because otherwise, because the reason is that somebody might have decided that value. If you consider...
but that's not how simplex works, right? You just vote for a timeout and then you move on, and we like votes for something completely. Like you just start the next view, it's just a new proposal, right? Or am I missing something?
Well, right now, off the top of my head, I don't recall specifically simplex how it works, but this is probably the way that it should work. Like this is how it works in Milliman, it's how it works in Alpenglow, and the reason is that you cannot rule out. If I receive 41% votes for a value in the 5F+1 model, I cannot rule out that somebody decided the value, because somebody might have. So if I get 41% of the values out of 80, it could be 19 of the votes that I have received for the other value might be Byzantine, plus the 20 that I haven't heard from, that make 80%. So this other participant that is correct might have decided it. So I cannot just forget about it. I need to continue with it.
That makes sense. So my so Kartik has this partial synchrony kind of roadmap, and he presents, like the PBFT kind of protocols, and then the simplex side, and then even those kind of, so hydrangea, for example, is PBFT 5F+1, whereas something like Minimit is more like simplex inspired 5F+1. But the way at least I understand PBFT versus simplex is that simplex, you don't have this kind of lock-based behavior that PBFT has, where like, oh, we move on, but we need to find this lock, right, to make sure no one kind of committed in the previous view.
Yeah,
it's just a quorum intersection where you know for a fact that you cannot both kind of have a timeout notarization and a finalization in the same round, just purely based on quorum kind of intersection. So I thought,
so if you want, I mean, it could be that the execution that leads to the attack is it pans out differently for different protocols, but the nature of it would be the same. It would be across views. This is the vulnerability that the 5F+1 model exposes users to, and in the case of across view partitions, but in the case of the same view, then actually the security could be greater. For some protocols, at least, you could perhaps make a protocol that it also has 20% security, perhaps simplex, I don't know, that has 20% economic security, even in the same view. I don't think so. But fundamentally, this is the best you can get, which is what Minimum gets, for example, in the 5F+1 model.
Gotcha.
Yeah, but it's an interesting question, and I need to go back and refresh my mind specifically of simplex, and then I can message you async on how the attack will happen on simplex.
Okay, yeah, I'd be super curious. I mean, that would be super helpful for me if you don't mind doing that. So,
oh yeah, for sure.
Okay, and then if we go back to this, so what's like if I want to leave, let's say this this meetup with, what's the conclusion or like the summary that I should have of this kind of gadget?
So the conclusion is that if you want to apply the 5, so typically the 5F+1 model is getting a lot of critique, right? Especially like in the Ethereum model, now Vitalik is talking about even the 6F+1 model, right? Waiting for 83% of the messages, not even 80%, which gives a Byzantine fault tolerance of 17%. But actually, I also was kind of hesitant at the beginning, but when you think about it harder, especially for something like Ethereum, for a finite gadget, it makes total sense. Because if you design this in the right way, you can get much more economic security by just waiting a little bit longer, by just waiting one more broadcast if you want, as a client. And it's true that liveness is more affected because you need to wait for more messages in these models. But in the case of Ethereum, for example, it's a no-brainer because you already have the available layer that provides availability. And the finite gadget is only here to provide greater safety tolerance. So increasing, in the current Gasper, the economic security is 33% to 66% in good cases, but actually no, it really is 33%, even if you receive all the messages. In some views. Because as long as there is a view where you haven't received all the messages, you have to decrease the economic security. Adding this decision round immediately in the 5+1 model immediately increases the economic security from 20 to 60. And if you receive all the messages and they're all for the same value, which they will be because this is after decision. So either if they're all for the same value of someone's going to get slashed, the economic security increases to 80%. And in the 6+1 model that Vitalik is proposing, the economic security increases even further, up to 83% even. So, this is really the strong result that comes from SNARE. And I had a little bit more, but yeah, perhaps we should have jump a little bit more from ZLB into these other results. But that's the important result, basically that 5+1 increases economic security. If there's anything that you want to get from this talk, is like the economic security 5+1 is actually fantastic. If you are happy with the liveness, trade-off that you're doing there.
Okay, this is perfect. I love this. And yeah, I mean, here's your Twitter handle. Everyone should follow Alejandro. This was awesome. So, okay, wait. Can we take a second? Go back to the slide then.
Yeah, of course.
Where you had the table that I still don't really understand.
Oh, this one here.
So you have view 1, 2, 3. This is just it could be view 4. Like, when is this running? When is this? You say it's just one extra broadcast, but
yeah.
Is that kind of happening for every view or when?
No, exactly. If it was for every views, then either you wouldn't get the benefits of it if you don't wait for it, or you will just not get the benefits of 5+1 model, right? You will not get one round of voting termination sort of thing. So we take it completely outside of the views. We have just a minimum protocol that runs in views with one round of voting. And then when a process has terminated that protocol, normally in a decision, we say this protocol terminates in a pre-decision. And for this pre-decision to become a decision, they need to receive N-F broadcast that say that N-F people have also pre-decided the same value.
Okay, I see. So, and this again, so it's happening for every view just in parallel, kind of, or whenever you receive here.
It happens once after termination. I wouldn't say it happens for every view. It happens, so every view has one round of voting.
Yeah.
But once anybody has terminated, in whatever view they have terminated, then they run one extra broadcast that doesn't have views.
I see. Okay, I'll be super curious to dive into this, and there's clearly something that doesn't seem to work in my mental model of how simplex and the extension of minimit, but I'm probably misunderstanding minimit, so that's probably where it doesn't fit.
Yeah, I'm definitely gonna go back to simplex at some point this week, and then come back to you on how this attack occurs. But intuitively, if the we do agree that simplex proves that Byzantine default tolerance against 20% of Byzantine, less than 20% of Byzantines, right? Which means that if there's more than 20%, there should be some attack that breaks safety.
I mean, simplex in the 33% model, right? Not the 20%.
Oh, sorry. You mean in the 33% model? Oh, yeah, of course. No, then it wouldn't apply. No. But simplex votes twice, right? That was the
yes. Well, what I mean by simplex is I'm just saying simplex because I've kind of basically black box minimit as just like simplex in the 5+1 model, so you kind of bring it down one vote. But I've always assumed that the finalization happens just like simplex, kind of in parallel for every view. So you kind of move on to the next views, and you just like all of these kind of finalization run in parallel, as opposed to kind of a more pipeline approach where you kind of, the finalization of one round is kind of depending on the previous rounds, which seems to make more sense in this, what you're presenting here. But
right. I think you're thinking about the optimization of this. This optimization is orthogonal to what I'm presenting here. This is just on the case of safety. when
Right.
the view starts is a different orthogonal problem.
Mhm.
Yeah. So
Amaya, did you have a question or before we wrap this up?
Oh no.
You're also
Yes.
digesting this.
I think I'll have to dive deeper into this just to like fully grasp it. But yeah, I think my earlier like questions are a bit clearer now. So thanks for that.
okay, awesome.
For sure. And then the conclusion for Ethereum side, what you have on the last slide, is this something that could also be used by like Ethereum that's trying to move to mini-mint, or is this
Yeah,
is
yeah,
this-
yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
So actually, what you need to do, the only thing you need to change is, because this simple finalization run, as you were saying, can be pipelined. So the only thing that you need to do is that whenever, now forget about the optimization of minimum for a second, right? Imagine everybody progresses when they receive 80% of the votes and not less. So everyone starts a new view only at that moment. If you do that, then the only thing that needs to be changed is to attach one more parameter in your new vote, in the new view, that says, did I decide in the previous round or not? And what did I decide on? Just the hash of whatever I decided on, or zero of zero hash otherwise. And that increases economic security already from 20 to 60%. It's that simple.
I see. But if everyone waits for that, then you're just back to a 2-round protocol, right? Or a 3-round protocol.
No, you're still one round of voting. Okay, so this will lead to a longer discussion now. But this is the simplest way to show quickly that there's a difference. If you have a 2-round protocol that imagine simple consensus, 2-round voting protocol, and imagine it takes 10 views to decide. That means 20 rounds of voting. Even if you did the most naive thing here, because there's 1 round of voting and then 1 extra at the end, then you get 11 rounds of voting, not 20.
Yep, I see where you're going. I see where you're going. It also clashes with my model of how Minimint works, but I think this will be like awesome for me to go back to Minimint, have a really strong reason to kind of dive into the detail, and this is awesome. We can. I mean, I'll ping you with some more questions.
Yeah, of course.
Awesome. Okay, let's end it here then. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thanks, Sam.
Thanks.